we had a number of people who had questions, and we wanted to leave a little bit of time so that, so that anybody can ask questions, and we don't want you guys to get home too late. So if there's anybody who wants to ask a question, you can come right up to the front, and you can use our microphone, or you can, talk from your seat. Frank, go ahead.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Powell from NYCEM for attending here tonight. I do remember your presentation, and I saw your Ready Up presentation in August that you delivered to the city. Thank you. And thank you, Officer Baptiste, for being here, and thank you to the Chief and Deputy. My concern is about, I want to say evacuation, but just hear me out for a second here, okay? And there are no trick questions here, so even though it might be related to NYCEM, I'm not putting you on the spot, for an answer, okay? Our community is 12,000 people here. A good number of them are seniors and people with disabilities. The island was built for people with disabilities, so that's an important community segment.
Can I just interrupt
Sure.
for a second? One thing, when we talked about the building management, they, in 2019, they did submit a list to us with all of the residents who had physical challenges, and that if there was a case of evacuation, that these are the people who would need to be focus on energy and attention. I don't know if they gave us apartment numbers. They didn't want to get us into personalizing, but they did give us information so that apartment number 123, that is where a person is physically challenged, and if there was ever a case that in this building that these people that they would need our help. So they wanted to maintain privacy, but still maintain help for all of the residents. And they were very forthcoming. We compiled a list. One of my officers checks on the list periodically, just so that we can be up to date. And Amoroso had talked about this also, the buddy system. One of the things that I do see on Roosevelt Island is if something happens in some of the buildings, that there is somebody who knows that person and who can help out that person. So,
And thank you to the building managers and public safety and RIOC for taking that initiative. That's very, very, very helpful. So what my concern is that there have been prior maps. This is what our hurricane evacuation zone is. Don't worry, I'm just showing it. You don't need to look up close. The bottom line was most of Roosevelt Island was Zone 2, which was the two endpoints of the island, and the center is Zone 3.
do you guys know what the zones mean? For the lower the number, the more probability that you would have an issue in case of a hurricane. So Zone 1, they're the most, that's an area that will probably be evacuated. Zone 2 and up to Zone 5. There are 6 zones in New York City. 6 zones in New York City.
Right, so I think Coney Island is Zone 1, okay? So that's easy to understand. And somewhere, inland is Zone 6, okay? Now, the reason why I mention this is because when the mayor does give evacuation orders on that, my understanding is that they're probably going to be mandatory, and that would affect 9,000 people on the island.
Can I interrupt you one more time?
Sure.
About this information.
Yeah.
This was crucial. This happened during Hurricane Ida. We got messages on our phones that there was going to be a problem. A lot of people did not listen to them. And then they came out, a lot of information afterwards. We have to, listen to our phones, listen to our TV. There was a lot of information given out that I saw the next day. People were driving in areas that they could not make the drive in. They had gave out information. They told people, stay away from those areas. People did not heed the warning. So that's one thing that I think that going forward, that listening to and being prepared to receive the information will help a lot of New Yorkers.
And if I can just point to NYCEM here that they run the Notify NYC program, which is the authoritative, and you're happy to get it. It has all the right information, and of course Roosevelt Island has their RIOC advisories, which are in sync with that. So subscribe to those two things, and if you want, there's an app on the phone, Notify NYC, you can get it that way too. So what my concern is that because we've now shifted to most of the island being Zone 2, with just a couple of buildings over here being Zone 3. So we're in Zone 2 right now. We used to be Zone 3, and downhill from us, really, is Zone 3. That doesn't make sense to me, at least. This is another map which all you need to see is the blue line. There's a blue line ringing Roosevelt Island and Astoria. There's about 91,000 people in Zones 1 and 2 in our area, of which correspond to the 3 evacuation centers that the chief had mentioned. And that's about a capacity of about 450 cots, okay? We're way oversubscribed, on that. So what I would like is I would like for Roosevelt Island, for someone, I know you can't respond to it on the spot, but to check the maps, because I believe we really are Zone 3 on a check with National Hurricane Center. I've done all my homework on this. I believe we are Zone 3, and as a result of that, for the benefit of the island here, if they're evacuating Coney Island and just outside of that, which would be Zone 2, most of Roosevelt Island doesn't have to evacuate unnecessarily, because Zone 2, just so everyone can picture it, we all know the promenade, the road, okay? Zone 2 is outside of that, according to the National Hurricane Center weather maps. It's the same information NYCEM has. So if you could check on that, that would be helpful to our community, because then people could properly prepare and assess the risk, not when Coney Island's being evacuated, then Roosevelt Island, or majority, needs to be evacuated. So if you could follow up on that, Mr. Powell, thank you very much. And thank you for all the good work that NYCEM does and Public Safety does and NYPD, and I'm sorry the fire department's not here to thank them. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I have to say, okay, I can always yell on this. Thank you so much, Frank. And I will take that back. We're still looking at that. This zoning is something that came actually from the National Weather Service. So, they looked at storm surge, over these last few weather incidents. They looked at storm surge. Does everyone know what storm surge is? Okay, I see everyone nodding. Okay. So anyone who does not, I'll explain.
Could you explain it?
Okay, storm surge is a huge wall of water that's pushed forward ahead of a hurricane. It's a dome of water. And when that dome of water crashes onto the shore, it can do a lot of damage. Sometimes it's as tall as a 2-story building. And it can do a huge amount of damage. As you can imagine, that was water crashing into a building. In Coney Island during Superstorm Sandy, cars were floating. And a lot of property was destroyed. And even there was some lives lost. So, the National Weather Service looked at storm surge activity and other activity that's involved around weather incidents, and that's how they came up with these suggestions for updating these ratings, so that's where that came from. It really didn't come from the mayor. Well, ultimately, I guess you could say it came from the mayor, because the mayor makes decisions. That's why we elect him. But it's based upon information that came from the National Weather Service. And we're still looking at it, as I mentioned. I'll take what you said back, Frank, and that's very important. And I'm listening to you, and I'm listening to other people who are saying, who are feeding us information from points all over the city. So don't think, what you're saying is not being heard. Believe me, I'll see that it goes to the appropriate authorities.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, thank you all so much. My name is Audrey Gray. I'm new. I'm actually moving here October 1st. I've been in Brooklyn the last 10 years, and I can't wait. I've been fascinated with it ever since I first learned about Roosevelt Island, and I know too much about the history. I just love it. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be part of a small community. Like, how amazing. So I have two really geeky questions. One of the things I asked, of course, my mother, everybody wanted to know, is this safe? Is this like a good idea in the era of climate change? We moved into an island. And so I asked a lot of people how it did during Sandy, and how it did during Ida. I was watching and listening, and I'd love to get your input on, I heard you say earlier, we're lucky here. And I got that sense, right? The island did well during Sandy overall, and actually pretty well during Ida too, although somebody told me that the water came into the red bus, and they had never seen that amount before. Like I've never been on a bus when the water comes in it. That's gotta be like a scary moment. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on what are the island's strengths and weak points, both in terms of like geography, land height, like I don't know any of this yet. And also, how should I be aware of the East River, and what should I be looking at and watching for when those storms come in? Like what's normal? I'm just learning about it, but if you could geek out with me and just describe the geography. Are we on good rocky high land here? Is that why we're lucky? And what about the river is dangerous or not? I'd love to hear any of that. I'm super interested.
I can only tell you from my experience, not from my expertise in the matter. I saw the river during Sandy, and I saw what the river did. Never seen that before in my life. I saw different parts of New York City where the water, I have a sister who lives on the FDR Drive on the Lower East Side, and she took a video, time lapse, and she saw the water come from the East River over 8 lanes of highway on the FDR Drive to the land of the building and rise up. But we've never seen that before. We have not seen that since. But it happened. So is it possible that it can happen again? I think so. Go ahead.
I can actually give you the answer in numbers. So the elevation right about here is about 25 to 30 feet. The elevation at the promenade, right there, the roadway, is about 11 or 12 feet. Okay, and then the normal sea height is about 2 feet, which is definitely about 5 feet downward from the railing there. The other high points on the island is Cornell is about 31 feet in elevation at the tops of the hills. Octagon is actually fairly low. That's the reason why it's in zone 2. Kohler Hospital is at elevation 7. Okay, so that's the reason why that flooded. So those are some of the things. And in terms of flooding here, we only got up to the edge of the promenade here. Obviously, flooding was worse up by Octagon and Kohler Hospital.
And that's where water came from.
Right. And if you take a look at the maps, that the inundation maps, it's exactly where Hurricane Sandy came. So it was very close. Yeah.
That really lost power up at the Octagon for like a week. It was longer than they expected.
During Hurricane Sandy?
Yeah.
I wasn't here for Hurricane Sandy.
The reason why was when they built Octagon, Con Ed had built their main power, source over at Kohler Hospital, so it was just easy to connect to that feed. And when Kohler then got flooded and knocked out the power, they've since rerouted the power, so Octagon now has its own power source independent.
Is that where you're moving to?
No. No. I'm high ground.
Yeah, Mr. Powell had mentioned something about evacuation zones on
You
road.
want to get up to the mic so everyone can hear the question?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Powell had mentioned something about evacuation sites on Roosevelt Island. Are there any evacuation sites on Roosevelt Island? Because you had mentioned 3 sites that were schools in Queens and Manhattan. Could there be evacuation sites on Roosevelt Island?
Yes, I think the chief mentioned them.
So what happens, it depends on the emergency. So, if we have an emergency just in a building and we just have to, take people out of a building, like this is one of the evacuation sites, the chapel. We also use Sports Park as an evacuation site. Depends on the emergency.
Coastal storms are not going to evacuate on Roosevelt Island.
Yes.
Other evacuate.
Yeah, so that's what I think that we meant, where an evacuation could be on Roosevelt Island. Say that there's a fire in one of the buildings, and now we need to keep people in a place. You can come to, this is one of the places, the chapel.
The locations that the chief gave were if we had to evacuate the island. Those are those evacuation locations if we had to evacuate the island.
You can keep that in, go ahead. You can keep that in mind also. The chapel and when Sports Park is reopened, those are the 2 evacuation sites on Roosevelt Island. I deal with the nurseries and the daycares in the schools. If there's an incident at the school, this is where we bring all of the school kids to the chapel. We have upstairs, we have downstairs, or we bring them to Sports Park. So if you're on Roosevelt Island and you have children, and there's something that happens at the school, this is where we bring them, and this is where you would pick up your kids from.
It's similar to the cooling centers. Like when we have the cooling centers during the summertime, we have designated areas where people can go.
And this is one of the
cooling areas. So if you had to get out of your building but not actually leave the island, we have the locations that. But I think that we were talking as a whole in the beginning as more of we had the full evacuation of leaving the island.
Yeah.
Those are the 3 locations that we would be set up for Roosevelt Island residents off island.
Does that answer your
Yes, it
question?
does.
Okay.
Thank you.
You didn't raise your hand, bro. No.
How you doing?
Thank you for the information, it's pretty good. So quick question, has there been a situation where the subway, the tram, and the bridge are closed in a given event? Because during Ida, the subway, I found out about the storm and the flood when I was already in Manhattan. And in the subway, we had to stop at 63rd and 2nd. And say, it's not gonna go to Roosevelt Island. I was wondering if the tram would be working. So what are the typical ways of has that happened before? And then if so, what are the typical ways to get into the island, especially if there is a shelter in place?
Well, what happened with the subway, and sometimes there's a little bit of miscommunication. Some people had said that the subway said that they were running, but the subway had water on the tracks, and the subway just could not get onto Roosevelt Island. The signs were saying that the subways were in service, but there was water on the tracks at the time, and that's why we had to keep it closed until they were literally pumping water out of the tracks for a period of time. The tram runs just about all the time, except for if there's lightning or the weather just can't handle it. So one of the ways that you can almost get onto the island is by the tram, even though the subway floods out, which that doesn't happen often, but during Ida it did flood. And then the buses, the buses were running for the most part. Our red bus was in service, so if you get to the red bus and the Q102 was running, and it was going on and off the island. So we did notice that, and we had to take it into account that the subway was flooded. It took on a lot of water at the time. So.
The most difficult thing if you were in Manhattan and the tram and the subway was shut down is you'd have to get to Queens in order to get back onto the island. That would be the last thing that would ever close, is closing of the bridge. I know we've had a lot of bridge closings during Omicron, which has been a little crazy, but those are, security purposes and things like that for the other.
Any other questions? Comments? A little bit of information in there?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to hear what you think, what are the weak links as we think about climate change in the next 10 years and the craziness that we're about to see? What do you worry about in terms of like safety, or what are you allergic to? Like they were very bad, right? People die, crazy number. So I was wondering what your gut is about the island. Like when a storm's coming, what do you worry about?
Can I tell you what my gut is? And Frank would probably know a lot more than I do, but the island is relatively new, and they're building new, and they're taking into account some of these things, like, Cornell. Cornell is, to me, very innovative, that they're thinking ahead. So I think that as they build new, and, that they're fortifying, and I can tell you this, that RIOC is looking, to make sure that we are stable also. There's a lot of infrastructure going on in RIOC right now that, making sure that we are safe and secure. The president of RIOC, who, lets us put together this and gets us out here to provide information, he's, he is 100% into the safety and security of the Roosevelt Island residents, and how we can make sure that, the infrastructure is good so that they will be safe. So that we don't have, during Ida, he was a catalyst for, making sure that that we had information, that we knew that things that were going on, that we were getting updates from the MTA, that if the tram was going to go out, that we sent out advisories telling people that the tram would be out. And as soon as the tram came back in and online, that it was out there, we were up all night and sending out information, or trying to get out the best information possible. So
Is everybody here signed up for the advisories? One of the things when you come, being part of the advisory, we constantly keep that updated on a regular basis, and we try to give as much information to the communities. Today, even when the bridge was up for a couple of times, we had traffic jams. We were sending out advisories, and then 8 minutes later, we were sending out our advisories. The bridge is back down. And we were like, "Why are you doing it? It's only going to be 8 minutes." We're just trying to constantly keep the community updated with as much information. There was a traffic jam on Main Street because the bridge was up, so we wanted everyone to know why there was a traffic jam.
And I'll tell you this, just talking about the bridge. The reason why the bridge was fixed so fast, that was the birth child of NYCEM. When the bridge went down 5 years ago when I was here, NYCEM convened a meeting with FDNY, with DOT, with Roosevelt Island, the president of Roosevelt Island at the time, just so that in case of an emergency with that bridge going up during this time of the UN General Assembly, they put assets on the island. They put a fire truck, they put an EMS crew on the island, so if the bridge is stuck, that the emergency services will be here on the island. And if you notice, if you came on that bridge, DOT has about 10 cars out there, and that's because when the bridge went down 5 years ago and we couldn't get off and on, they have an engineer stationed on the island right now. So if the bridge goes up and down and it gets stuck, that engineer fixes that bridge right away. So that was the collaboration with NYCEM for Roosevelt Island to get services here. That's one thing that I'm happy with. Mr. Powell, like I said, I met him a few years ago, but NYCEM works with Roosevelt Island to ensure that we get services here.
And that also continued. If you guys were part of the 4th of July festivals this year, we had so many assets helping us out throughout the city and the state that we had so many extra officers. We had so many extra people in the subway. The subway station, it cleared out. I think it was
45 minutes.
45 minutes. People said that could never happen. We had 6 mechanics. We had God forbid the elevators were to break down. We had elevator mechanics on standby. We had everything so that we would not create an emergency situation with the number of people that were on the island. So it is, these things have just snowballed into positives for our island. You know, and the more assets that we get, the safer it is for the community. You know, and if you
That's about
attended
being
it,
prepared. You know?
yeah, and if you attended it this year, compared to the years prior, well, last year we didn't have a celebration, but the year prior, it was a lot quicker, it was a lot more efficient with people getting off the island and onto the island. So I think that it's just working hand in hand with our counterparts that is really creating a safe atmosphere. I want you to feel safe. I know you said you're coming here, and me and the chief say it all the time. You know, safe is crime. You know, crime is it is, and we want you to feel that way as far as the environment also. Go ahead, Fred.
So if I could just tell you what the climate, I recently was trained on this by FEMA on the climate, how the climate affects emergency response, and in particular, like for example, New York. So here's a couple things. If you write down the phrase NYC Flood Map, okay, and Google that, you will then get to an interactive map that will then show you what it looks like in 2020, well, we're in 2020, 2050, 2080, and 2100. And you will see the effects of then the sea rise that's predicted, and they give a couple of scenarios on that. It gets higher. Most immediately, over the next couple of years, what's going to happen is the climate here is going to get wetter, okay? So the storms will deliver more rain, and that's because the air temperature on the earth is going up, which means it can retain more water as water vapor, which feeds the storms, and then when they're done with it, then they dump it out on the land. So just because Hurricane Sandy was a Category 1, it did a lot of devastation because it dumped a lot of rain, like Hurricane Harvey did in Texas. So we're going to get more rain, okay, on that. The West Coast, they're going to get, drier. They're going to suffer from more drought. And then overall, as the water rises, it may or may not affect. There may be some positives in this, and that as we adapt to this, we can do things better that protect us. And that's a long story, but I'm just saying there's not all bad news in this. There's some opportunities to mitigate, and one of the topics is equity and mitigation, which everyone in emergency management will tell you about. It's all about making sure, poor communities typically suffer, both in disasters and ultimately in mitigation afterwards. And so, society-wise, we're trying to change that. So, but for Roosevelt Island, like I said, that would give you the best indication. That NYC Flood Map would point you to the city's Department of Planning for that map.
Very knowledgeable, Frank. That's why you're my hero.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for this wonderful topic today. And I know you mentioned that the best way to get information about what's happening in an emergency is through RIOC advisories and notify NYC. If for some reason that it's not possible to get internet or not possible to get those kind of electronic information, what is the best way to find out information about what to do? Because I would hate to do something that is misguided.
I have been getting a lot of information from our local news. If you can't, the internet and the phone is down, we have to pay attention to our local news. They give out a lot of good information, a lot of updates. Listen to the emergency broadcast system. It really, really works. They cut into, your TV program, and they bring you information. One of the things that we try to do here at RIOC also is just, our public safety officers, if you're on the island, we try to make sure that they're up to date on information. Sometimes we have to give out handouts. Sometimes we just have to, let people know exactly what's going on. The public safety officers are utilized for a number of ways, but they're really good in just, informing residents, giving them the information.
And that's also one of the things that we'll probably discuss with the building management when we speak with them and talk about forming a committee where, the best way they could help us when first responders is try to get as much information out to their tenants as possible if we weren't able to, use our systems and internet and, text messaging went down. So that's something that we could use their help with also. So that would be something that will be discussed during those meetings with the management.
Just, there's a question, believe it or not, on today's National Emergency Manager Jeopardy, where the New York region was faced off against New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. That was one of the questions, and the answer to that question, at least on Jeopardy, it's a good one, is have a battery-powered radio. All of those things still work. Most people have cell phones that have an FM app on them, so they are able to receive FM radio, even though the cell towers might be down. And then, if you really want to go fancy, there's the NOAA weather radio, which would then give you advance warning about weather, on that. But a battery-powered radio, and check, there's an FM app that works on most cell phones that you can receive, you can tune into FM frequencies.
Anybody else?
No?
No?
Well, I just want to thank you for coming tonight. I think that we're going to attempt to better communicate these mini-series that we're going to have. We're going to try and have something once a month. Like I said, October 6th, we're going to talk about domestic violence. It's very informative, brought to us by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and the NYPD. A lot of information. And I say this, if we're all okay with domestic violence, maybe someone that you know might need the information. Maybe we could pass the information on to someone else. And then in November, what's in November?
I believe it's November.
What are we gonna do? No.
Active shooter.
Active shooting in November will be done
It's active shooter awareness. Active shooter.
will be done in the chapel again. So, we very much welcome you, and we thank you guys for coming, and get home safe, all right?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.